All right, well, good morning. I want to thank you all for coming out. And today we are submitting our administration's proposed operating budget for the coming fiscal year. This is, of course, the first budget under the new administration. And when I was on the campaign trail, including the 56 forums that we had to get here today, I heard one consistent theme from folks from all walks of life. And it's that public safety is by far and away the number one priority in Albuquerque. And that was unequivocal. It's something that still continues to resonate today. And that's why our budget reflects this priority above all. This budget is an expression of what our community thinks is important. It's an expression of, in many ways, our values. And I'm going to touch on each of these areas today. Now, fundamentally, this proposal gives APD and AFD long-needed resources to tackle the crime epidemic in our city. But we cannot fix public safety in Albuquerque without focusing on efforts like behavioral health, mental health, and addiction. Tackling crime from all sides also means dealing with our economy, our stagnant job growth numbers, and also finding more academic opportunities and enrichment opportunities for our children. It also means providing programs in terms of homelessness and housing for folks who are dealing with a lot of these issues as well. So let me touch on a few of these specifics, and then we're going to let a couple of our department folks speak in even more detail. So one of the most effective ways to tackle our crime epidemic is, of course, to give APD the resources they need, and that means hiring more officers. Now, when we say the term officers, it's important to remember that we throw that around, I think, somewhat casually. It includes detectives, it includes lab techs, it includes our PSA program, it includes all folks on the front line at APD. Now, our budget offers resources to hire 100 new officers this year. And that also will get us towards our goal over the next 4 years of reaching 1,200 officers to fully staff our Albuquerque Police Department. Now, this means addressing shortfalls in every area command in the city. It means sworn officers to solve crimes. It also means, as I mentioned, detectives, and it also means getting at some of the issues we have in our crime lab with respect to rape kits and the fingerprint backlog. Now, we're also going to go full force when it comes to our efforts around neighborhood policing to ensure constitutional community policing, and we're allocating $4 million to upgrading technology and equipment so that our officers can actually do that. Now, as state auditor, you might recall, we identified a backlog of about 4,000 untested rape kits in our crime lab. And as mayor, we've also discovered a backlog of latent fingerprints up to 18 months from crime scenes all across our city. We're allocating almost $2 million to address both of these backlogs. This is a critical step forward to honoring the promise to survivors towards getting offenders off our streets and behind bars. We've also allocated $1 million to continuing funding for early intervention and prevention programs. This means domestic violence shelters, domestic violence services, sexual assault services, and abuse services, as well as neglected and abandoned youth. And when it comes to fixing public safety in Albuquerque, we know we have immense challenges. And part of those challenges are the deeply seated problems around addiction facing our families. That's why we've allocated $3.2 million to develop a mobile integrated healthcare and community outreach program. This is a program that will enable us to provide decentralized, effective healthcare to distressed and indigent populations all around our city. This also means that when we have someone who fits that category, instead of seeing ambulances and police cars behind me showing up on the scene, we're actually going to have a trained professional and a paramedic coming out and helping them on an individual basis without taking resources from other departments and other areas in the city. Now, we've also put $15 million in affordable housing contracts to try and address some of our challenges with respect to homelessness and indigent care. We also have $8.2 million in homeless services. These programs are centered around the Housing First model and are funded in the budget to provide non-law enforcement, service-based responses to homelessness. We also want to do what we can to help make our economy stronger. and that means fully funding our Economic Development Department's core operations, including supporting local businesses and recruiting new businesses. Our Lodgers Tax Fund is healthy thanks to the partnership with Airbnb, and that's enabling us to put more money into tourism and to promote our city as a tourist destination. We're also making sure to make our city purchase local, and I think we've always mentioned that before. You're going to see this summer this administration going literally contract by contract and trying to swap out any out-of-state vendor with a local vendor here in Albuquerque. Now, when we think about crime, we also have to think about ending the cycle of poverty for our youth. And the biggest thing we are doing in this budget is doubling our access to after-school, summer, and early childhood programs for our youth. These programs provide educational and recreational activities for our kids. It keeps them off the street and out of harm's way. This year's budget, we're also filling the gaps that were created after years of cuts during the structural deficit of past, which include the losing of the hold harmless funds that we used to receive, and also increases in healthcare costs. And I know we talked a lot about the structural deficit problems in the tax GRT increase debate. And I want to let folks know this isn't quite big enough for everyone to see, but we're going to hand this out. This is a chart that talks about where every dollar of that tax increase is going to go. And folks might remember that the City Council required us to spend 60% of that on public safety. And we are actually spending 80% of that on public safety, and the rest is going to fix that structural deficit. So those details are here. We're going to talk about some of this, but that'll be sent out to all of you in the public shortly this morning. So when it comes to that expected amount of GRT that we're going to get in July, as I mentioned, 80% is going to go towards public safety. And this also means that now we submit this budget to City Council, and it's City Council's turn to refine this and work on it further. And all of this, of course, is subject to our ongoing collective bargaining negotiations, which we have to do as well. But this budget is a blueprint for the next year in our city, and I feel it is prioritized in the right place, which is around public safety. Now, I want to thank everyone who's here today, but also ask for a few words from our leaders from APD and from AFD. And so to start with, our Chief of Police, Mike Geyer.
Thank you, Mayor Keller. The mayor is making public safety the city's top priority, as well it should be. We appreciate his focus on these issues so that we can thrive as a community where people feel safe. I want to outline 4 points about these priorities outlined in the budget plan. The first point, as far as for the APD, is we want support for our officers. We want to hire more officers, as the mayor indicated, and we want to keep our experienced officers because it will help us fight crime. Just as important, we must support our existing officers who are out there on the streets every day keeping our community safe. The best way to support them is to get them some help, get them some more officers. With a fully staffed police force and adequate resources, we can be more effective and officers will be more productive. The second area, again, as the mayor mentioned, is community policing. Mayor Keller's vision is for a robust community policing program depends on these additional officers and resources. We are already restructuring APD to emphasize community policing in everything we do. Our goal is to rebuild our specialized units and have enough officers patrolling our streets so that they have enough time, unaccounted time to do non-enforcement activity during their shifts so they can interact with the citizens in the communities where they serve. The third major area is target major crimes such as auto theft. We've already made great progress in the first few months, especially in tackling the crime of auto theft. And we're the first to recognize we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But we're focusing these resources on crimes because this auto theft crime is a nexus to all the other crimes that are occurring in our community, including violent crime and interpersonal violence. We are consistently finding these offenders with long histories, criminal histories, and these auto thieves are responsible for most of the other crime as well that occurs. Our fourth major area is to get assigned more detectives to tackle and investigate these violent crimes. As we hire more officers at the bottom end, we'll be able to use these experienced officers, move them into these positions of investigative authority and responsibility. We're rebuilding these units to tackle specific areas of violent crime such as homicide, narcotics, crimes against children, and gang activity. So with this concept of one city, one Albuquerque, we're developing a lot of partnerships with the DA, the courts, BCSO, and state police. As we meet with these community leaders, we hear the concerns about repeat offenders who are still on the streets committing crimes. People want to know, why aren't these people in jail, or why aren't there services available to keep them out of jail? The philosophy behind our community policing program is the same philosophy behind the mayor's vision of one city or one Albuquerque. For APD, that means partnering with the district attorney, partnering with the courts, partnering with the sheriff's office, and partnering with the state police. Recently, we joined partners with UNM as far as the auto theft initiatives, because of the crime also extends on their campus property. Just this morning, I left a meeting with the DA's office talking about anti-crime initiatives, gun crimes, as well as auto theft. And yesterday, we had a meeting with the courts regarding a program, especially court for diversion for auto theft first offenders. And we also have the partnership you're all aware of with the state police and BCSO. We need these partnerships to effectively fight crime and keep our communities safe. More important, we need these partnerships with the community in order to regain the trust of the very people we serve. So with that, I'd like to welcome AFD's Chief Dow and Deputy Chief Emily Jaramillo.
Thank you, Chief Geyer. Thank you, Mayor Keller, for making our priorities your priorities. I'd like to introduce Emily Jaramillo. She's actually going to be our new Deputy Chief of Emergency Services, and she does get promoted tomorrow. So we're very excited to have her as the first female Deputy Chief with the Albuquerque Fire Department. Absolutely. So, as you know, AFD is committed to serving the citizens of Albuquerque every day, but unfortunately, we join other public safety agencies across the country in being strained for resources. In fact, in 2017, the Albuquerque Fire Department responded to over 107,000 emergency calls, and the majority of those were EMS calls. In fact, 87% of those were medical calls. Our firefighters also respond to the most calls per firefighter than any other fire department in the country. With the mayor's budget, however, we found ways to make better use of those resources that we do have. So I would like to introduce again Chief Jaramillo to share more information about the Albuquerque Fire Department's mobile integrated healthcare and community outreach programs.
Thank you, Chief Dow. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Dow. The funding that the Albuquerque Fire Department is receiving in the mayor's budget will be used to create the AFD Mobile Integrated Healthcare and Community Outreach Program. This program is targeted care for indigent and distressed populations in underserved areas of our community. This will shift non-emergent 911 calls to less resource-intensive approaches, including home or site visits to common callers and community risk reduction efforts for private residences and public spaces. As the Chief mentioned, 87% of AFD's calls are medical in nature, and so this will relieve an enormous burden contributing to 911 wait times. The program will also include a robust and visible basic life support unit presence in the Southeast Heights and other high-need areas. This new program allows our first responders to provide additional services as a partner in our citywide effort to interrupt the cycle of crime and lead to a safer city and high quality of life for all. Funding will also assist AFD to capture data better, or to better represent the needs of our community through computer software, as well as instructional staff, paramedics, and EMTs to support the mobile integrated healthcare and community outreach program. Thank you.
Okay, I believe what we're going to do next is obviously this is one of the larger activities that we do in City Hall, and so we're going to allocate some just additional time for taking questions and so forth, and we'll figure out who might be the best person to respond to them. And so firstly, though, I want to thank our chiefs for their input and our budget team for putting this together. This is something that actually has been done in Albuquerque routinely without a hitch and on time, and I'm proud to say this year is no exception. But it's also because there is a whole department who works on this year round. And so Jerry, who runs that department, and of course our CFO, Sanjay, thank you for your work on crunching all the numbers. Okay, I also want to add just in case folks are also interested, there's obviously a lot more inside here. You'll be getting all the information today. We are also investing in our animal welfare department to deal with some of the issues we've had there. And we're looking at a couple of things around spay and neuter programs and adoption. And there are some other programs that you'll see in the budget that are a little bit smaller in nature, but I believe will make a real difference in our city. So with that, I want to open up for questions.
I'll ask. Mayor,
Sure.
54%, I think, of what I just saw, the GRT increase is what will that money be, will you substitute that money for the regular general fund money that is supposed to go to the police department?
We will not. Yeah, it's a great question and a common financial trick. Thank you.
Mayor, can you go over sort of the revenue sources of how the city's collecting its money for this budget and sort of what you're projecting in the upcoming fiscal year to this fiscal year and what it tells you just about the state of the city?
Sure, in our economy. What I'd like to do, actually, we have lots of information on this. There's a big section on that in the memos that we're going to be releasing today. Maybe to paraphrase that, Sanjay or Jerry, if either of you, Sanjay, you want to... the short story is mostly everything's flat, but go ahead and come up to the mic so they can...
As you know, that the gross receipt tax, I think we expect the growth to be about 2.2% compared to 2018. And that would include about $55 million in this new tax which just passed. Out of that, though, we would be able to use only 1/12 of that goes to the reserve. And even though the tax passed just 3 weeks ago, we will be collecting the tax from July onwards. So we will get a revenue of about 11 months. So there is that increase of net about $45 million, which would be used for this this chart. I hope that answers your questions.
So just to clarify, you're expecting the increase in GRT to come from just the tax increase, not additional?
The increase in the tax percentage, which is 3.8, plus the increase of about 2.2% over last year. That is the growth rate.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And so this, just historically, we've usually assumed a 3% growth rate, and we haven't been meeting that goal. So we're trying to have a little bit more realistic growth rate. Sectors like healthcare and such tend to be up. Manufacturing's a little bit down. I read this last night, so if you want more, there's actually a great 6 pages with graphs that's going to be in our budget document. Yeah.
Mayor, can you talk a little bit more about the about $2 million to address the untested sexual assault kids? With that new money, when will you be caught up, and will that be enough to catch us up?
You know, the backlog is staggering, as folks have mentioned, and that money, we believe, is going to be able to address the backlog in the next couple of years. There's some nuances around how we process that, whether it's contracted or otherwise. And so we're actually working on a detailed plan on how we're going to get that down. But we think in a couple of years, this should hopefully get rid of the backlog.
So this is just kind of a start to help.
It is, that's right. Because we'll have to do probably another amount the following year and so forth. But this should take care of a huge chunk of it.
When might we start to see more police officers on the street? Is that more of a question for the chief? But obviously, we got to wait for this budget to kick in. But when will we actually start to see some sort of discernible difference?
So, sure, and Chief, you can chime in here. But let me just start with, there is some financial timing that is just the reality. Meaning that, as our CFO mentioned, these dollars really start flowing in the end of July. And so it's going to take time to ramp up. And when we're really going to have the ability to do so is going to be in the fall. And that's just a financial reality. But in the meantime, we're working on a host of issues to get more officers out on the street on patrol, and also a set of non-monetary incentives and changes that we believe is going to also attract folks to our police department. And Chief, do you want to elaborate on any of those? Or not?
Just real brief.
Sure.
I've already found out that we have about 50 officers seated for the next class in June, or the next class, if it's going to be in June. We're going to have a good group of officers already to that end. So That's 50 of the possible 100 that we could hire just in this fiscal year.
Yes, others?
In terms
Sure.
of making cuts, what specific cuts are you looking to make? Can you confirm any from the budget deficit initiative report?
This budget is primarily focused on sustaining government that's been sort of operating on a year-by-year basis by pulling in all sorts of swept funds and leftover funds and sort of one-time fixes. So the focus of this is really around sustainability. If you go department by department, you will see cuts in each department in different areas. And so most of the cuts are around contracted services and so forth, and they vary by department.
So you can confirm the ones that are in that initiative report, or is that just a plan right now?
Those were
or-
past ones, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer? Sure.
So the budget deficit initiative report did identify
Oh,
some
I know
historical
what you're talking
cuts,
about.
but it also had sort of a menu in the back of potential cuts we would have to make in the coming fiscal years. Thanks to some great work by our financial department and also the tax revenue, we were able to forestall most of those cuts. Specifically, we had initially thought we were going to have to cut about $1.8 million in social service contracts. We do not. In fact, we were able to increase that to $2 million total, so that was good. And we also did not have to make the cuts to 311 or to the animal services department that we had anticipated.
Yeah, now I know which memo you're talking about. Yeah, and there's also no golf courses being closed. We get calls about that a lot. So we were able to avoid all of those very painful choices that we had outlined there.
What's the overall, just the budget compared to last year? What's the growth of that?
I believe it's well, Sanjay, do you want to speak to the specific numbers on that? Remember, while they're checking, the budget, there is the general fund budget, and that comes from our city's tax income. And that's roughly, and I'm going to use round terms, but that's about $500 million. But then when you add in our enterprise funds and the federal flow-through dollars, you actually get to about $1 billion. And so those are the relative increases different for each category. Because of the tax increase, the amount from the general fund is increasing on par with the tax increase. But the total amount is actually much less. And I almost remember the page.
The general fund growth is 9.6 higher due to the tax.
Yeah.
So that's 582. And then the overall nine after
Okay, just hold this right. So the percentage increase is basically 9.6 for general fund increase. And the additional dollars basically are, if you use more or less rounding, it's basically the same plus the tax increase. So the tax increase for this year, we're estimating at 49 million. And so that's on top of the past amount.
Total budget increase is 4.1%.
That's right, in the total, so on not the general fund, but the total budget is 4.1, a 4.1% increase overall. So that's, despite all of the new money, et cetera, this budget is only a 4.1 increase. It's really just a large reflection of a shift in priorities.
If I may clarify, APD will then be funded at $1,100 this fiscal year.
Just over 1,000.
It's 1,040 for this year, and we want to focus on filling those. Right, so there's 60 vacant from the previous amount, plus we're adding 40 to that to get us to the capacity to bring on 100. Good questions. Others?
Can you talk about what happens next with the timeline?
Sure.
Moving forward with City Council signing up.
So what happens basically is that we're going to have, give that back, thanks. Okay, so today we will officially send down the legislation, and you'll see that's actually in the back of the budget document, and it'll show up in terms of an actual resolution that goes to council. And that is accompanied by a host of memos and documents that go into more detail. So that happens today, and then for a couple of weeks, council is going to look at this on their own in sort of a staff analysis. And then starting in May, we have several public hearings on the budget process. And it's about the third week in May is when we expect, and there's some ordinances that govern the timing, the third week in May is when we should have a budget signed and passed.
Did this feel like sort of a crisis budget? Because it seems like almost every area that has priorities, there is a crisis, whether it's rate bid, whether it's animal welfare. You went into this with a lot of issues, a lot of problems to solve.
I would definitely characterize this as that, and it's because of the fact that we have challenges in our city that are well documented around this reinforcement of violence, poverty, crime, educational challenges, and how these are feeding on each other. And so we obviously can't fix hardly any of those without dealing with public safety. So that's where we're starting first, but you can't just address one of those issues. And that's why we're looking at all of them.
Are there any new proposed taxes in there, and would they go to voters?
There are no new proposed taxes. I certainly hope they would go to voters.
And as far as services, potentially, increase on what we pay or cuts. What are we looking at as far as city services?
City services are basically going to be the same. There are some fee adjustments. The city actually charges fees for all sorts of things, whether it's community centers, space usage, transit, all our facilities, and so forth. And so there are some fee adjustments, which typically happen every year. And there's actually hundreds of different fees, and so those are actually outlined in the budget. All right, well, if there's no others, what we'll do, we can... Sure, Dennis.
Mayor, I know you have mentioned before that the previous administration had a lot of positions vacant. How many vacant positions are there?
Hundreds, that's for sure. I don't know if we actually have a number right now. If we do, we'll give it to you.
Between 250 and 300.
About 250 to 300 vacancies. Of course, especially when they're in our police department, that presents certain challenges. And we're trying to fund, when you have 6,000 employees, there's always going to be a vacancy rate. And so that's natural and that's healthy. But you don't want to see that in areas like law enforcement to get too high. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. There's some, subject matter folks if you'd like to speak with them. Thank you.